During my many trips to China, it was a common experience for someone to come up to me after teaching a biblical view of human life and human value, that someone would come up and say to me, "You cannot be a good mother to more than one child." I heard this many times in China. And the reason is that in China, during the period of the one-child policy, it was a common government training, propaganda to enforce the one-child policy by sending out the message that no one can possibly be a good mother to more than one child. And of course, the one-child policy in China led to many, many tragedies. Number one, it meant that most of the baby girls were identified through ultrasound or other means and were terminated, because if you could only have one child, you wanted to have a baby boy for both cultural and economic reasons. It also meant that girls, whenever there are fewer of something, they become more valuable, became much more susceptible to being kidnapped, even being resold. Terrible, terrible tragedies. It led to a lot more of unfaithfulness in marriage. For example, if you didn't want your wife to get pregnant with a second child and put her at risk for multiple abortions, you started to see the normal rhythms of marriage disrupted, and you started to go outside the bounds of marriage for your sexual fulfillment. And so it just destroyed. Everywhere this policy was promoted, it led to great destruction. It lasted for about 36 years. It was sort of formalized in 1979. It ended with an announcement in 2015. And the reason it ended is that people who can do math, people who study population, demographers, could recognize that they had created a terrible, terrible situation in which the only reason that the Chinese population wasn't in rapid decline is because people were starting to live older as their economy grew and health services improved. But they were in a panic to stop this trend of killing all the baby girls. And finally in 2015, they said you can start to have 2 children. They changed that again to 3 children, even just last year. But none of it's working. The birth rates in China continue to drop and drop and drop and drop. The reason is because people would say, well, why would I want to be a bad mother? No one can be a good mother to more than one child. So this propaganda now is coming back upon the government as in the form of rejection. So it's a real problem. And it's not just a problem in China. It's a problem everywhere. It's even a problem here in the United States. It's only here that the decline in birth rates is covered up by so much immigration that is taking place here. But in Russia, in most of Europe today, there's a serious birth rate decline, and these lead to great economic problems. On the other hand, while you reject that view, that horrible view of human life, I'm not sure that many of us really accept the biblical view of human life and children either. Let me give it to you as it's described to us in Psalm 127. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Psalm 127, 2-4. This is quite the contrast. It's saying, do not eat the bread of anxious toil. Do not get up early and go to bed late and spend all of your day pursuing economic wealth and riches. It just eats away the joy of living. In contrast to that, it's saying that our wealth, our treasure, what makes us rich in a biblical worldview is actually our children and our sense of family. And it says here, blessed is the man with a full quiver. And wherever I mention this here, especially in the Western world, people react just as negatively to that as they do when I tell them about the Eastern worldview of children and the one-child policy in China. Certainly, we don't have to have as many children as possible. That's maybe true. It's not what I'm saying, but people hear it that way. Somehow they're suggesting that when the Bible says that blessed is the man with a quiver full of arrows, meaning children, that we need to have as many children as we possibly can. It's not what it's saying. It's saying that we ought to value children, period. And if the Lord brings us more than one or two or three or four or five, it's okay. I had a good friend who lives in Wisconsin, and he called me some years ago to announce that he was having his fifth child. Him and his wife were expecting child number 5. And my response to him was, wow, you are a rich man. And on the other end of the phone, I heard him start to weep. And I said, what's the matter? He said, you're the first person who's actually said something positive when I said that we're having our 5th child. In America, in the United States today, and in much of the world today, if you do decide to have 3, 4, 5, 6 children, you will be much criticized and scorned. So most of us are rejecting the biblical view of human life and family as well. If I were to give you a quick summary of the biblical view of children, I would probably use a quote from this book by Andreas Kostenberger called God, Marriage, and Family. He writes in here, the esteem in which children were held in ancient Israel can be attributed to several factors and convictions. And here's the biblical summary of the view of children. The belief that every human being is created in the image of God. That's foundational. That's bedrock. So if God gives you something that is actually made in his own image, he's giving you something that is a blessing and is a rich treasure. That's the point. Number 2, the view that children ensure the perpetuation of humanity and the fulfillment of the divine mandate to subdue and cultivate the earth. The Lord has commissioned us to go out and have children. Why are we so anti-child here in the West as well in the East? I think the answer is because we're all eating the bread of anxious toil. We all want to go out and make ourselves wealthy and have things, and we can't see beyond this material order. Number 3, the notion that the conception of children was ultimately a product of divine action and hence a sign of God's favor. Every child isn't just manufactured or made. It's created by God and given as a gift. This is true for all human beings. And so this dignity, this inherent dignity that is attached to children made in the image of God heightens their value in our eyes. At least it ought to from a biblical worldview. And he goes on to say the belief that, in a sense, parents live on in and through their children. Hence, the worst fate was for one's seed to be cut off, or infertility was painful for all of these reasons in the ancient world. Don't eat the bread of anxious toil. That's what I'm trying to teach myself. Work hard, prosper as much as you can, but make your life values and your life goals align with a biblical view. Rejecting both the East and the Western view of children, I come to this conclusion. It's wrong to say you can't be a good mother to more than one child. I always say to the women in China, how many children did your grandparents have? Oh, they had 8 or 10 or 12. Were they good parents? Yes, they were good parents. And immediately that propaganda would begin to fall away. If the Lord gives us more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children, it's because He's also giving you the great capacity to love and rear more and more children up in His name. It's your mission field that God's giving you. What we value then is family, God, and time for worship, family, time for children, neighbors, time to help the hurting, missions, time to reach a lost world with the great news of the gospel. These are things worth living for and dying for if necessary. And they're a great replacement to eating the bread of anxious toil that in the end leaves us pretty lonely and isolated. Reject China's view of children, reject the Western view of children, and open yourself up to the biblical view of children. Blessed is the man with the full quiver. As many as the Lord wants to give us, let's have an open heart to it. Thank you.